Thanks so much for joining us. What's your first recollection of echo? I've asked that to many of the people we've had a chance to talk to, but what do you remember the first time you saw an echo?
I actually remember it pretty clearly and have written about it. I was a resident at the Peter Bent Brigham Hospital, forerunner of the Brigham and Women's Hospital, probably 70, early 71, something like that.
Okay.
And I had a patient, Dr. Lou Tischholz, who founded the Tischholz formula for calculating ejection fractions and volumes from M modes, came in very enthusiastically, bouncing along with this picture with a bunch of spikes on it, and he said, "This is fantastic. The patient doesn't have mitral stenosis." I said, "I know that, Lou. I'd listen to him." It was pretty early on at that point, and things have come a long way.
Did that intrigue you about the field? It made you want to continue and learn more about it?
It did, although in fairness, I probably got involved with it more directly when I went to the National Institutes of Health in 1972 for my military service, so to speak. And Walter Henry was there at the time, and there were a lot of fascinating things going on with echocardiography. I found it particularly intriguing because I thought it was neat to be able to do physiology and evaluate patients functionally without hurting them.
Tell me about because we had Jules talked a little bit about Walt Henry and the NIH, but what do you remember about that time?
I was there a few years before Jules, actually. Jules, I think, was a phono fellow at NIH just after I left. But Walt and Jim Griffith were working on the first mechanical sector scanner, one of the first 2D instruments, and they also were quite early in developing pulse Doppler, which was sort of this project that was going on over in the corner that nobody talked very much about. But many of the initial uses of 2D echo in the U.S. were done by Walt and Jim. My daughter Megan was actually the illustration for the publication in Circulation in 1974 that demonstrated transposition of the great arteries. She was the normal with the normally related great vessels. So we were directly involved in some of the early 2D echoes. Fun stuff.
When you were there, and so when you were there, the wobbling sector scanner was born or was being born?
Well, it was there was another wobbling sector scanner, as I recall, that Reggie Eggleton and Dr. Feigenbaum were working on in Indianapolis at about the same time. I think Walter and Jim's first paper was published a little earlier, but I'm not certain about that. But it was certainly one of the early U.S.-based 2D echo.
So how'd you continue your career? So if you leave the NIH, where do you go next?
So I actually left the NIH in 1975 and had taken a job in Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania. I'd done some studies on atrial septal defect and was interested in congenital heart disease at that point. And I took a job with Joe Perloff at Penn, and intending to try to continue some of that work. And then I had an opportunity to come up to go to France for a year and do cardiovascular research. And I asked Dr. Perloff sheepishly about that, and he said, "Go, it'll be a fabulous year, we'll save your job, come back in another year." So I went to Lyon, France for a year, 75 to 76. And I actually learned to perform M-mode echoes there on an old, as I recall, an old Unirad system that didn't have a sweep screen, so you had to record the pictures from the A-mode spikes and then take a piece of paper out into the hall, hope that the sun was out and that the pictures had come out. We have come a long way from that.
When did you go to Washington, and what was going on in the world of echo when you went to Washington?
I went to Seattle in 1978, and I'm unimaginative because I'm still there 31 years later now. I went out there actually because the opportunity to join a program project grant that Don Baker was running that included 60 engineers and Jeff Stevenson as the only other clinician. They had, at that time, done the first color Doppler M-mode, Marco Brandestini and Jeff, and they had on the books a 2D color sector scanner, real-time scanner that would have developed, I suspect, if funding had continued. But funding didn't continue, and I sort of enjoyed what I was doing, and here I am today.
What, Alan, how did you get involved in the American Society of Echo? I mean, so you've told me a little bit about the technology, the development of technology, but what's your first exposure to
Well, I was in France in '75 when ASE was founded, but the field was of interest to me. I'd read Harvey's first book, and while I was at NIH, as I recall, and working with Walt and Chester Clark, sort of learned to interpret echocardiograms, and ASE was clearly the organization that represented the field. Some of my early work in Seattle was on some very rudimentary 3D echo, and I recall Harvey inviting me to Indiana to present some of that work at one of his ACC-sponsored meetings, and it was just sort of a natural fit. So, I mean, if you were in echo and serious about it, ASE was a no-brainer. You had to be part of it.
You became the 10th president of the American Society of Echo. Do you remember what went on during your presidency? Things that challenges or accomplishments?
A lot went on. I followed Jules Garden and preceded Dick Kerber and worked closely with both of them. They've been good friends for a long time. When I gave my Edler lecture after my presidency, I reviewed at that time the history of the society. And I remember in putting it together thinking that it would be nice to do things categorically, but this project happened, this project happened, this project happened, and associate them with terms. And what was clear to me was that really the evolution has been a continuum. There were very few things that started and finished within a given term. But with that proviso, there are three things that stand out to me, and I probably am not the only one to mention them. First was, and not necessarily in order of importance, but the resource-based relative value scale was being introduced at the time, and there were a lot of Medicare issues that were coming up and reimbursement issues that were coming up. Tony DeMaria had very admirably and effectively represented ACE, but was getting involved in other things at the time. And I remember when I was president-elect, Jules asked me to sort of look after that area, and unfortunately I learned more about it than I ever wanted to, and sort of spent 14 years doing that on behalf of the society. But it was complicated enough work that it looked to me as if some continuity was involved in it. And so that was a big part of my focus, and I think in fairness of most other presidents subsequently. The second was the development of the ACE exam, really by a committee that Ned Wayman had chaired, which had occurred prior to my presidency, if I'm remembering correctly. But as others may have mentioned, there was growing interest in from other practitioners to be involved and to be able to be part of that exam. And there were some briefly but relatively contentious periods with the cardiovascular anesthesia group. This was at a time when many of us worked in the operating room, and we sort of ran back and forth between the echo lab and the operating room, and were on the beck and call of the surgeons. I think we learned that surgical time and real time aren't the same time. When they said, we need you now, that meant we needed you 5 minutes ago, or we might need you in the next half hour. We're not quite sure which. And it became pretty clear that people working in the operating room and there all the time were advantageous, but it was not a smooth transition at the beginning. And I spent a good bit of time with Bob Savage and Sol Aronson and Ned Wayman and others sort of trying to keep groups talking and building bridges. I think Bob Savage was instrumental in that because he always kept preaching to keep the focus on the patient and do what's right for the care of the patient. And then the third would be the lab accreditation, ISIL. ISIL was actually founded during my presidency. It matured subsequently, but we had discussions with different groups. We went through a number of meetings talking about with whom to work. AIUM, this group called Inter-Societal Commission for Accreditation of Vascular Labs, which was interested in expanding, and with whom we ultimately chose to go. I think those were three important areas.
Very extremely important. You know, you played a critical role in the society's sort of advocacy and all of that, and certainly we could talk about that. But you've been asked to, and have done a fabulous job with the editorship of the Journal of the American Society of Echo. What's your recollection of the journal, and how do you see it as we move forward in playing a role in education?
Well, I think, as I recall, I was on the board of directors actually when the discussions initially went on about whether to have a journal or not, and there was a fair amount of discussion as to whether that was a good idea in the first place. There's absolutely no question that the journal certainly wouldn't be the journal it is today, and might not exist at all if Dr. Feigenbaum hadn't agreed to take it over as editor, and really by the force of his commitment and passion for the field to make it a happening thing. So it clearly was the right thing to do, and I think has been successful. I was selected to follow in Dr. Feigenbaum's footsteps in 2007 as deputy editor, and to take over editing the journal as editor-in-chief 2008, and have done so for about a year and a half. It's been a very exciting time. I'm an unrepentant English major, and so I've always enjoyed the written word and written communication. I've had a little bit of background with it, and it's been fun to sort of shift my focus from, are we going to get paid for something, to how can we articulate something in a way that's meaningful to readers and to the field. And it's been a very busy time, but it's been a very enjoyable time.
Do you see the concept of a journal? I mean, you know, at a time when newspapers are going out of business, and people are downloading books to little devices and stuff like that, what's the future of a journal? Same thing like what's the future of a book, but what's the future of a journal?
Yeah, well, it's as was said yesterday, futurists worry about if there'll be enough futurists in the future, and I don't know the answer to the question, but it strikes me that really a journal is a mechanism for conveying information. And I don't think information is going to go out of style. I think our field will continue to evolve. It remains very vibrant, 20 years, 30 years, or beyond since the society, and even that, beyond that, it's been one continuing evolution. And I think there'll be continuing evolutions down the road. To me, an ultrasound machine is a specialized computer, and I haven't seen a lot of people that believe that computers will stop evolving or getting better or getting more capable. So there'll be new information to disseminate. What format that takes is hard to know. A school of thought says everything's going to be online and nobody's going to use pieces of paper. Another school of thought, frankly, probably from more mature folks like you and I, like to have a piece of paper, like the flexibility of being able to take it wherever. We won't go into that. And I don't know that it's necessarily one or the other. We're actually looking at issues like Kindle or other kinds of readers, or podcasting, or taking advantage of the media, but in a way that is not just because we want to do the next thing, but because it's something that our audience, if you will, demands. One of the things that we have done in the past year is to augment what Dr. Feigenbaum started, which is the relatively broad use of video clips in the journal, not just in case reports, but in conventional articles and review articles and in original research articles, because frankly it enhances the flow of information and the information content for our audience. You must see this field differently because of your editorship, in the sense that you get to see manuscripts coming at you that have new applications, new this, or redoing things. Are you bullish on the field of echocardiography? I'm certainly optimistic on the field of echocardiography. I don't, it's such a broadly used technique that I don't see it going away. I think there are risks, there's no question. I think we have as I've written before, we are in some ways the victims of our own success. When I started out in Washington, as I recall, in the very early days, I had two sonographers, very skilled guys. 2 echo machines. We did probably 3 or 4 cases a day, and nobody could care whether we looked at them that day or the next day. They weren't going to believe the answers anyway. And now they want the answer before the patient's been unhooked from the ECG leads, and they're going to act on it. They're going to take care of the patients on that basis. And there is certainly the potential for overuse. So we have our challenges for us. Reimbursement will clearly be one of them. But I don't see the technical innovations going away. I don't see the abilities to do better with patients. We may have to learn where and where not, but I think we're terribly important for patient care. I don't see that going away.
We've had discussions in these interviews about the importance of sonographers. They're colleagues with us, and tremendously. Are there challenges as an editor of a journal to making it meaningful for sonographers? Because we have different levels of sonographers. We have people like Jane Marshall and David Adams, and then we've got young trainees or young people in the thing. What do you see the journal doing for the sonographer colleagues?
We have a very broad range of sonographers in the society and in the field in general. I mean, I've learned an enormous amount from my sonographers over the years. I've been very lucky to do that. And Alan Wagner we have on the editorial board, and from my money, he's just as good a scientist as anybody else we've got on the editorial board. So I don't know that sonographers' needs are necessarily categorizable separate from physician needs. Okay. We have research physicians, we have practicing physicians. They don't have the same needs either. My wish is for the journal, and I can only package things that are sent to me. I don't write the articles. Some days I think it might be easier if I did, but I don't and I can't. But my wish would be to have enough cutting-edge research that new things get out there that need to have enough practically oriented articles that people who are in the trenches can do what they do and do it better and do it right. And that we have, state-of-the-art reviews from time to time that are authoritative and appropriate educational vehicles and can give people who have trouble traveling, which these days is all of us, the opportunity to keep up with things and get CME credits.
Last question. You've certainly had a long history in the field and a long history with the technology, and now with you have a different perspective being the editor. Do you have a fond memory or two of Echo, its impact in patient care, its impact in people, its impact in your life?
I've heard other people talk about the same things, and I don't know that my recollections are going to be terribly different. I have a lot of memories. They're almost all positive. And as others have said, I think one of the most positive things about it has been the camaraderie. This is really a team sport, as I wrote recently. I think the leaders in the field have grown up together and remain friends. I remember next year we'll have a past president's dinner that will include 20 past presidents. And what's remarkable are 3 things, I think. Number 1, that we're all alive and reasonably well. Number 2, that none of us use walkers yet. And number 3, that we're all still good friends. But I think that's been true not just among the leaders, but among the teams that have worked together for patients. So that's meant quite a bit.
We appreciate the job you've done in the past and the job you're doing with the journal. You've made a major contribution. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.